What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Nvidia stock, ticker symbol NVDA, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Thursday, May 23rd. All right, guys, so a nice after hours for those of you who own the stock, for those of you who own calls, hopefully heading into tomorrow. We'll see where this ends up. The volume in the after hours, of course, being an earnings event, the volume was actually relatively substantial. The higher the volume, typically the more definitive the move. But the volume, it's not like it was overwhelmingly way more than the intraday session, right? So just take it all with a grain of salt. But listen, the earnings were pretty good. Okay, there's a lot going on here. We have a 262% jump in sales. Okay, as far as numbers, we have beats on EPS and revenue. The EPS, the expectation was 5.58. We reported 6.12. Revenue, the expectation was 24.59. We reported 26.04. All right, now the expectation on revenue is likely to vary depending on the source. But I think across most sources for expectations, at least reputable ones, we saw a beat on both, which of course doesn't hurt. But the thing that's more important than the earnings reports, and you guys hear me say this a lot, it's going to be anything that relates to AI, how the industry is moving, demand, and that 262% increase in sales signaling a continuation, we'll say, of the artificial intelligence boom. I mean, Nvidia's in the driver's seat as far as that is concerned. Now, on top of that, another thing that doesn't hurt is the 10-for-1 stock split that they announced here today. What that means is that the amount of shares in existence will increase by 10 times, and the price of the stock will get cut by 10x, I suppose. So that split is reportedly happening on June 7th. It should be all cleared up by June 10th. So it's a Friday and then a Monday. And basically, to make it very simple, because it's not all that complicated, if you own shares of Nvidia, what will happen is the amount of shares you own will 10x on that day. Depending on your broker, it might not occur until June 10th. We'll see. It'll all be settled by June 10th, so no worries there. And then the price will of course get cut by 10x. So if this is your first time encountering a stock split, first of all, congrats. Second of all, your equity is, nothing changes there. The amount, your money in the stock, nothing changes. It's just how it's structured. So, for example, if you owned 100 shares, just really quick, right now at $1,000 or 1,007, if this were to split right now, you would then own 1,000 shares at $100.70 per share. So it's the same, it's just different structure. And typically, the reason that stock splits tend to excite investors, at least in the short term, okay? It doesn't always last as far as the split excitement is concerned. Obviously, with Nvidia, there's a lot more going on here than just the split. But the reason it tends to excite investors is the theory that when a stock becomes cheaper, more people can afford to buy it, or more people are attracted to buy it. Because if you have $1,000 and you throw it in an account and you're like, I'm ready to buy stock, you really want to go and buy one share of Nvidia? It's kind of a letdown, right? At least psychologically speaking. No, you want to be able to at least buy a few shares, right? So if it's $100, okay, well, someone could buy 10 with $1,000. That's the idea. It just makes it more accessible. It also tends to make the options chain more attractive to utilize. And the companies know this. So when a stock gets really expensive, a lot of times, at least companies that are smart, in my opinion, I mean, obviously, Berkshire is a different story, but, stocks that have one common stock and want to be attractive to all kinds of investors, institutional and retail, they tend to split. So this is, I think, a smart move. It really is the gist of it out of Nvidia. So listen, let's take a look here and get the best grasp we possibly can on this stock heading into tomorrow. We're going to take a look at the volume profile to pull out any bullish or bearish bias that we possibly can. We have some volume in the after hours, so we'll take a look under the hood. We'll take a look at the psychological levels, because now, listen, everything's changed now in terms of psychological levels, so we have to take a look at that. Implied volatility is going to be very important, especially tomorrow. for those of you trading options. We'll take a look at the expected move and how that played out here and what the expected move is into the end of the week. And then we'll take a look at the directional bias coming out of the chain. So let's get started here on the 5-minute chart. We'll just really quickly take a look under the hood and see if we can pull out any directional bias from the volume profile. I look at these as two separate entities, the price movement and then the profile. And the idea really is like, okay, we had very bullish movement in the price action. We know that there's no reason to sit here and talk about it. But the truth is the volume profile can tell a completely different story, or it can just add the cherry on top to say, yes, there's very bullish bias there. So if we just take the peek under the hood, kind of peel back the onion, you can see at least as far off the open, very normal, very contextual. Moving through here, what's interesting is we actually started to see a little bit of bearish bias through here. You can see we got that big increase that's out of context, broken up by only a couple of green bars throughout that time. That was FOMC minutes. Okay, that was not necessarily Nvidia specific. We got some high volume. Just the sheer amount of volume heading into the close, I would say is a little bit of bullish bias. This tends to be a rebalancing bar. However, heading into earnings, that's likely to change a little bit. We then got the very low volume chop heading into the release, and then the release hits, and you see that big green bar pop. I watched it live. Nvidia actually tanked off. This is not uncommon. It tanked off first and then quickly recovered and then drove higher basically the rest of the evening. And listen, if you look through here, guys, it's going to be a little bit different in the after hours on an earnings release, but we got a lot of volume pouring in, which gives us enough data to work with. And the reality is we're seeing a lot of green bars that are out of context, that tend to be on average higher than the red bars, and we're only getting broken up by 4 red bars, one of which was kind of that uncertainty bar that tends to happen the opposite direction immediately after the release. So this one is almost expected. The rest, very shallow movement, okay, basically on the drive higher. That's pretty clear supporting bias to the bullish side, at least out of the volume profile. Now listen, let's move on. Let's move on to something arguably much more simple and very effective. The psychological self-fulfilling prophecy levels will start with the 30-minute chart. That white line is the 50 period. That gray line is the 200 period. And you can see that things have gotten shaken up here a little bit. But listen, the 30-minute is the quickest to adjust between the 30, the 4-hour, and the daily, because it has the fastest moving averages. The 50 is going to be the quickest. So that white line, that 50 period, guys, assuming we don't see some massive, ridiculous sell-off here tomorrow morning, it is highly likely that that 50 period gets torn upside here as we head into tomorrow. What I'm really looking for from a bullish perspective, I want to see a few things. I want to see this 50 period reclaim as many $10 increments in a single day as possible, because what do we always say? Big moves are great, but they tend to cause problems in hindsight if you leave too much of an opening for the negative thoughts, we'll say, to creep in to the bears and even some of the bulls, and they start getting nervous, right? What do we want? We want psychological barriers back the opposite way. We want feet to get up under the move as quickly as possible. Help it kind of regain its balance, so to speak. So I want to see this 50 period get ripped up above 960, above 970, maybe even above 980. Hell, 990. It'd be wonderful, right? I mean, the best case scenario would be to get above 1,000. We'll see. That would take an aggressive move. But listen, if we come back in and retest this as this comes higher throughout the day, I just want to see that bounce on high volume off the 50 period bears. The ultimate goal here tomorrow is to rip downside through the 50 period, wherever it may be at the time, rip down through, retest it on low volume, low sample size betting on the break, and then boom, reject off the level on high volume, reclaiming that as short-term resistance. Now the 4-hour, guys, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because, as of the after hours movement, we're 7.7% away to the downside of a retest of that 50 period. All I'm watching here is from a bullish perspective. You can see it's starting to curl. I just want to see a similar thing. I want to see that 50 period get as high as possible, as quickly as possible, but don't expect a miracle move to 980 or 1,000 in a single day. This is slow. Okay, but I would love to see it. If it could get above 940, that would be amazing in a single day. Okay, now, of course, if it came back into play, then I'm watching it as a high level of interest. that I know a lot of people are going to be watching, but it's quite far away, especially as of the after hours. So, the daily. This is the most important, and no, it's not going to show after hours movement, but that's okay. We know that the stock is at $1,000 or $1,007. It's going to be a lot easier once it splits to say the numbers. So, we talked last night about 1,000. We talked about that a lot. And the expected move that we came up with was just about plus or minus 50. We'll talk about that as well in a second. And that's basically exactly what happened. We ended up testing. It seemed like the market was pricing in, at least once we did our educated guesswork and got a lot of that out of the way. By the way, I cover Nvidia every day, so I appreciate you subscribing to the channel. We came to the conclusion that the market seemed to be pricing in a test of 9 or a test of 1,000 in the after hours. We tested 1,000 and crept right above it. Currently at 1,007. So that's great. But listen, $1,000 is the biggest level, I think, arguably in history that we've ever seen on Nvidia. It's huge. It's so obvious. Now, the reasoning for that is because if you show this chart to anybody, someone who's looked at a chart like a couple of times and knows what red and green means, right? They're going to say, well, it seems to me like $1,000 a share would be pretty important, right? Okay. That's where the pyramid of understanding begins. So it works its way up, right? The self-fulfilling prophecy mentality. The institutions, by default, are also looking at that because they know, hey, everyone's going to be watching this. And that's what I believe as far as TA. It's just self-fulfilling prophecy. It's all psychology in the short term. Right? In the long term, even midterm, fundamentals take over. In the short term, you have basically all psychology, and then periodically you get fundamental repricings that then pretty quickly turn back into psychology. So here's what I'm watching tomorrow. Bulls. Number one goal. Hold $1,000 a share. If $1,000 can hold and we bounce off of that level, listen, if we test it like 10 times, I don't care, and we bounce, and eventually, man, if we could see a high volume bounce away from that level, that's confirmation. I like confirmation. I like confirmation during the intraday session on high volume, right? Because that shows a big sample size of pouring back in, agreeing, yeah, hey, we're going to bounce away and treat this as support. Little insecure bounces on very low volume, while better than a break, are not great. Bears, you guys want to give up and reject 1,000 on as much volume as possible. That is your ultimate goal. Because the real price right now is 1,007. Okay. But it was on after hours movement. And if you guys can make this a 3-digit stock yet again, that's, I think, quite the power move out of the Bears. All right, so listen, tomorrow's a big, simple story. It's the battle of 1,000. Now, implied volatility. It actually wasn't all that high heading into earnings, which is unusual. Okay, but it's not uncommon to see IV tank off after earnings. That's natural. The traders have less of a reason to price in higher volatility now that the catalyst is over. So, don't be surprised if IV tanks tomorrow morning. It's not a certainty, but it's a high probability. It happens the majority of the time. So if IV tanks tomorrow, you might notice in your contracts that you're experiencing a little bit of IV crush. Okay? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're red. All it means is that if IV tanks, you may lose a little more money than you might have expected just based on your delta calculation. If you own, well, I'll say puts, but we'll see where it opens up, right? If you're directionally incorrect, I'll say, you might lose a little more than you expected to lose. And if you're directionally correct, you might make a small amount less than you expected to make if IV dumps off. So just be aware of that. But also understand, we've talked about this a lot heading into earnings. So if you were someone that was, making a bet on earnings, taking a trade into earnings, that was likely already a part of your plan. So you already know that. Okay. And if you do, you're like, yep, I worked that into my plan. I still decided that, hey, taking this trade was what I needed to do. It made the most sense here for my personal directional and volatility bias compared to the market. Great. That's all I want. Now, we'll just briefly touch on expected move because we already did. Now, if we look here, the expected move as of the close, okay, today, by Friday's close, because we only have weekly expirations on Nvidia, was plus or minus $79 a share. Now, this is going to get really interesting tomorrow once we see more repricing of this, but what that tells us here is that the stock has moved $57.50 in the after hours. So what the market is pricing in here, okay, this is the market's opinion. Okay, so, you know, it's the market. All right, the market is telling us that either, at least as of the close today, and by the way, we have new information after the bell, so take this as you will. Take it with a grain of salt. But the market is telling us that they believe by Friday's close, compared to today's close, we will see either an additional $21.52 approximately. Of course, it's just the one standard deviation expectation. It's not meant to be exact. To the upside from 1,007, because we've already seen 57.50 additional movement of that 79 after hours here. This is assuming it all holds, by the way. We're just kind of like theorizing right now. Or the other expectation is that the stock completely reverses, goes back to 949.50, and then goes down an additional $79.02 approximately. Okay, so this is a volatility expectation. It's meant to be a one standard deviation range. It's meant to be a window. It's meant to be the expected move, the expected volatility being baked in, but we'll touch on this more tomorrow once we have more data, which is going to be really interesting. The first day after earnings is always very interesting because you get brand new data in the chain. All right. And by the way, remember yesterday we talked about it, the expected move. We came to the conclusion, again, that it was very likely that the market was pricing in about $50 of movement. And we got $57.50. So that calculation ended up being pretty close, which is kind of a relief. Because that took a lot of educated guesswork to work out. So glad you guys were here for the ride. Let's take a look at the volume. All right, we had 1.09 million total contracts traded. We had 631,500 calls and 460,000 puts. So a bit of a call side bias heading into the close here. This was, of course, before earnings. We'll get updated information on this tomorrow, but we were seeing a slight call side bias on the overall. And then the delta range of 0 to 20, the short-term speculators, so those people that were making bets on earnings basically, was actually pretty undecided. It was 276,000 calls and 265,000 puts. So very, very close out of the bulls and the bears. It was pretty split down the middle in terms of short-term opinion. So I hope you guys tune back in for tomorrow's video. Hope you tune in daily, and we'll talk about more data that we get here tomorrow, which is always an interesting day because it's the freshest data immediately after the new information that we call earnings, right? So we'll see where this name opens up here tomorrow. Listen, guys, if you're getting value out of the Nvidia videos, please leave a like on the video. It's the best thing you can do to help grow the channel. Helps out tremendously, and it's free. Takes half a second. I greatly appreciate it. And listen, I'll see you in the next one.